According to the Federal Reserve, household debt has surpassed another historical high, with credit card delinquencies remaining the worst in over a decade. And yet, Americans still spent $71 billion just on impulse social media purchases, and placed 12 million orders on Amazon each and every day. Which begs the question, how did we become such a consumerist culture? Throughout the Second Industrial Revolution, innovation created many products we still use to this day. Automobiles, aircrafts, telephones, refrigerators, typewriters, all acted as the solutions to society's needs. With these new technological advancements, economic opportunity flourished, and the American culture quickly began to shift from individuals to consumers. During this time, American businessman and oil tycoon John D. Rockefeller was beginning to invest his fortune into the education system, creating the GEB, a promotion of education to the common person. Rockefeller donated roughly $43 million, equivalent to about $1.4 billion today. As going to school quickly became mandatory throughout the United States, it becomes apparent that there may have been some ulterior motives, with his advisor and co-founder of the GEB, Frederick Taylor Gates, famously stating, "We shall not make these people or any of their children into philosophers, or men of learning, or men of science. The task we set before ourselves is very simple, as well as a very beautiful one, to train these people as we find them to a perfectly ideal life, just where they are. So we organize our children into a little community and teach them to do it in a perfect way." As the Industrial Revolution began coming to a halt, companies began to see the weakness in a high consumerist economy, as individuals that could afford the new technologies had already bought it, and the increasing cost of manufacturing made it very difficult to compete. Ford Motor Company was experiencing a 370% turnover rate, as many were dissatisfied with the dangerous and monotonous tasks of the assembly line. Henry Ford then made one of the most surprising business decisions in history, by doubling wages to $5 a day, or roughly $157 when adjusted for inflation, and allowed workers to now work 40 hours a week. The following morning, 10,000 men lined up at the Ford Motor Company's gates wanting a job, and for the first time ever, a Ford Company employee could now afford a Model T, allowing Ford to double their profits in less than 2 years. But most importantly, the working class could now become the middle class, and with more time for leisure and economic opportunity, that would also lead to more spending. Following World War I, U.S. production was more than 12 times greater than it was in 1860, while the population over the same period had increased by only a factor of 3, suggesting just how much additional wealth was theoretically available. Following a short depression from 1920 to 1922, businessmen and economists began to fear that production had filled all of the needs of the consumer, causing a crisis of overproduction. This is when Alfred P. Sloan, CEO of General Motors, came up with planned obsolescence, defined as a strategy of deliberately ensuring that the current version of a given product will become out of date or useless within a known time period. This proactive move guarantees that consumers will seek replacements in the future, thus bolstering demand. Sloan created a different model of each GM brand a year, with a small technological advancement or style change that made the previous model now feel outdated. Sloan also tiered the cars based on incomes to consistently have consumers wanting the next better version as a sign of wealth to the masses. However, if you did not have the cash to buy the vehicles, GM would just sell one on credit. Alfred Sloan famously stated, "GM existed not to make motor cars, but to make money." Another example of planned obsolescence came from the formation of the Phoebus Cartel in 1925, which included leading electric companies like General Electric, Philips, and Osram, convened with the explicit goals of controlling light bulb lifespan. Prior to the cartel's establishment, advancements in light bulb technology were geared towards extending longevity, with bulbs lasting thousands of hours. However, under the cartel's agreement, companies manufactured light bulbs to last no more than 1,000 hours, imposing hefty fines on those who deviated from this standard. Even with increased advertisements and the introduction to ads on the radio, it became more apparent than ever that there was just not enough consumer power to keep up with the massive production. And as consumer debt rose to $7 billion, amongst many other factors, the Roaring Twenties came to an end, with the Great Depression halting consumerism for nearly 20 years. Instead of companies trying to find a more efficient business model, they instead tried to find ways to convince consumers that their wants were indeed needed items. With Frederick Allen, editor of Harper's Magazine, an American historian, stating businesses had learned as never before the importance of the ultimate consumer. Unless he could be persuaded to buy and buy lavishly, the whole stream of six-cylinder cars, super heterodynes, cigarettes, Rouge compacts, and electric iceboxes would be dammed up to the outlets. Nephew of Sigmund Freud, Austrian neurologist and the founder of psychoanalysis, Edward Bernays was most commonly known as the father of propaganda. Using what he learned from his uncle and mother, another known psychoanalyst, he began to form a way to engineer consent, to control and regiment the masses according to our will, without their knowing about it. With clients ranging from General Electric, Procter & Gamble, American Tobacco Company, to CBS, and political candidates such as Calvin Coolidge, even helping him win the election in 1924. What really put Bernays on the map and revolutionized the advertisement industry was his campaign with the American Tobacco Company in 1929, popularizing women to smoke cigarettes. At that time, it was seen as very unfeminine for women to smoke, resulting in 50 years of tobacco advertisements being directed exclusively to men. Bernays believed the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society, and began to use the feminist movement to call cigarettes the torch of freedom. During the Easter Sunday parade in 1929, Bernays hired women to walk up and down the parade while smoking, portrayed the emerald green Lucky Strikes box to be associated with wealth, and the cigarettes to help smooth your throat and trim your waistline. His campaign increased female smoking participation to an increase from 5% in 1928 to 33.3% ending around 1977. This campaign became so popular that advertisers changed from describing a product as a way to show its dominance over the competitor to using propaganda as a way to subconsciously create an emotional need for that item. When you look at some of the original cigarette advertisements, you can see its specificity and complete lack of resemblance to what style of advertisements we see today. But after Bernays, you can see the substantial change in providing emotional ties to make you trust the company. Another great example is Coca-Cola. When you see the original advertisements, it discusses and highlights key words about the product, but after the incorporation of propaganda, it once again causes you to have an emotional attachment that it will fill a need that you were actually searching for, all in an attempt to make them the necessities of all classes. This is done by dangling the products before non-upper class people as a status symbol of a higher class. Arguably his most famous campaign that you've never heard of, but most likely participate in every single day, was when he represented the Beech Nut Packing Company, which produced meats such as ham, sausage, and bacon, and began to notice that its sales were drastically dropping. So they called in Bernays.
We went to our physician, found that a heavy breakfast was sounder from the standpoint of health than a light breakfast, because the body loses energy during the night and needs it during the day. We asked the physician, after telling him why we were talking to him, would he be willing, at no cost, to write to 5,000 physicians and ask them whether their judgment was the same as his, confirmed his judgment. He said he would be glad to do it. We carried out a letter to 5,000 physicians. Obviously, all of them concurred that a heavy breakfast was better for the health of the American people than a light breakfast. That was publicized in the newspapers. Newspapers throughout the country had headlines saying 4,500 physicians urge heavy breakfast in order to improve health of American people. Many of them stated that bacon and eggs should be embodied with the breakfast, and as a result, the sale of bacon went up.
But what he fails to mention is a doctor that he entrusted in was actually just a doctor that was hired as a part of his PR team. There was never any scientific studies done, there was no research, there was no data to back up his claims. All the question was asked was, could a heavier breakfast equate to a healthier one? Which the doctor said, yes, it could be. So when all of those other doctors also inputted in their advice, it was just to the question of, could a heavier breakfast equate to a potentially healthier one? It never specifically stated anything about eggs or bacon. Today, more than 70% of Americans eat bacon in the morning. Written in his book Propaganda, published in 1928, Bernays states universal literacy was supposed to educate the common man to control his environment. Once he could read and write, he would have a mind fit to rule. So ran the democratic doctrine. But instead of a mind, universal literacy has given him rubber stamps. Rubber stamps inked with the advertising slogans, with editorials, with published scientific data, with the trivialities of the tabloids and of the platitudes of history, but quite innocent of original thought. Each man's rubber stamps are the duplicates of millions of others, so that when those millions are exposed to the same stimuli, all receive identical imprints. It may seem as an exaggeration to say that the American public gets most of its ideas from the wholesome fashion. The mechanism by which ideas are disseminated on a large scale is propaganda, in the broad sense of organized efforts to spread a particular belief or doctrine. Bernays' works was soon admired by Joseph Goebbels, and when Goebbels became the Minister of Propaganda for the Third Reich, he wanted to pursue Bernays' ideas to the fullest, creating a Führer cult around Hitler. When Bernays discovered this, he later stated, "This shocked me, but I knew any human activity can be used for social purpose or misused for antisocial ones." This observation led Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter to warn President Franklin Roosevelt against allowing Bernays to play a leadership role in World War II, describing him and his colleagues as professional poisoners of the public mind, exploiters of foolishness, fanaticism, and self-interest. This later caused propaganda to be remarketed as public relations. When Bernays was 99 years old, he was interviewed and further expanded on some of the topics in his book Propaganda. A highly educated class of opinion-molding tacticians is continuously at work, adjusting the mental scenery from which the public mind, with its limited intellect, derives its opinions. As we begin to learn more about Bernays and his impact on propaganda, especially through his book Propaganda, we begin to really see some of these tactics that are being used in these chaotic headlines that are spreading throughout the world, which really leads us to an important question. If we all stopped consuming, wouldn't the economy collapse? In short, the answer is, of course, referred to as the paradox of thrift, which states that an increase in autonomous saving leads to a decrease in aggregate demand and thus a decrease in gross output, which will in turn lower total savings. However, I believe it is just as equally important that we ask the question, if we continue down this path, will the economy collapse? And I believe that many of us can feel that something isn't right, as well as we can logistically see that the course we are on itself will indeed lead to an economic collapse. Ultimately, I believe it is a real gift that we have the ability and freedom to consume. It allows us to be able to have goods and services that impact us in our life, and hopefully then impacts those around us. Every single aspect of this video would not be possible if it wasn't for us being able to consume some sort of good and service in some sort of way. What I believe becomes really dangerous is when we just endlessly and without thought continue to fuel this machine on course to collapse. And this is by no means doom and gloom. I personally believe that things actually will end up being better, but I do believe that we really need to re-inspire innovation. We need to begin to re-encourage exploration. We need to understand that because we have the money and we are making the purchases, that if we shift the way in which we buy, companies have to shift alongside us. At the end of the day, all they want is to be profitable. But why does Amazon need to change anything if we are ordering 12 million packages from them a day? Why does Apple need to make a better product and decrease prices if we are so absorbed because the other person has green text bubbles? We are playing to their game. And I don't want this to be all conspiracy theorist, but I personally believe that we really need to begin to focus on the problems at hand. We need to take some responsibility, and most importantly, we need to begin to have conversations and discussions, and we need to begin to actively work on this problem. It isn't as easy as, here's a solution, let's just invest everything in that. But it also isn't, well, this sucks, but there's no other alternative. We haven't even had the discussion to explore that yet. Was Edward Bernays right? After reading Propaganda and spending hours of research on Edward Bernays, I couldn't help but think, is he actually right? Do individuals ultimately not want to know all of the facts and have the illusion of opportunity when making a decision? I personally believe that the answer is no. I believe to truly be a part of a democratic republic, then the civil liberties and governmental freedoms must be respected and reinforced, or else we are not a part of a democracy. I believe the more that you lie, steal, cheat, hide, cover up the actual information, that creates far more chaos than if we just know what is happening all the way through. I believe that we are human beings, not consumers. I don't believe that we are just some analytical data point on the Federal Reserve's data. I believe that fundamentally, we are just, for the most part, good people that just want a peaceful life and to feel fulfilled. I do, however, believe that through all of this chaos, we have begun to lose what it means to be kind. I believe that we have begun to lose what it means to be a neighbor, to do what is right even when no one is looking, to help someone in need when you see that they are in need. That even when every fiber in your being tells you not to do something and you ignore it, all you are doing is removing yourself and distancing yourself from the reason that we are here to begin with. I believe the more that we point fingers, berate, scream, mock, the more that we are just overall hurting each other. We have totally lost what it means to listen, to sit down, have a conversation, get into an in-depth discussion. We are too scared to even have a discussion now. As the chaos only becomes even more consuming, what gets us through this time is discussions. I don't want to have this discussion, but I feel like it is needed. I feel like I could be entirely wrong on every aspect of this video, but I believe it is needed to have this discussion. More of us need to have discussions, to come together, to listen, to help each other. I believe if we do not do this, then he may end up being right. Ultimately, this whole kind of topic is one of the main themes of the Matrix movies. So ultimately, I believe that the decision lies on each and every one of us, on what path it is that we are going to pursue. I just hope that whatever decision is made, that we lead with kindness. I thank you guys so much for your time. This was a long video. I apologize that it's a little bit more kind of sad and gloomy, but I think that sometimes these are the topics that need to be discussed. I hope that this provided value to you as always. Thank you so much for your support. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Chocolate. I remember when they first invented chocolate. I always hated it. Oh, but this chocolate's not for eating.
You rub it on your skin, and it makes you live forever. No.
Live forever, you say? I'll take one. Come on, you lazy Mary. Start rubbing me with that chocolate.